Welcome to another Git tutorial video where I'm going to introduce you to the concept of submodules. So let's go ahead and get started. This is sort of my working development area. I created a new repo called carsim, and this is totally fake, but the idea is I want to build a simulation of a car. And what I want to do is use the Trick simulation framework to do that. I've used the Trick repo in several other videos just to explain some of the Git mechanisms. And so what we're going to do is we're going to use a example application of using a third-party code base that's already tracked in Git and implementing that as a submodule in the repo where we are actually doing development. So if you look in this repo right now, you'll notice that really there's only 3 real files, and those are in models area. I dumped a couple of empty C files, or C++ files, and then in the Sims area I have a fake S defined. And this is just Trick simulation framework stuff. You don't really need to know about this for the video. This is just to show you that there's not much in this repo yet, and there's no submodules. So I'm going to walk you through how to actually add the submodule. But before I do that, I want to talk briefly about the purpose of submodules. So you might wonder, well, if I have Trick already, which I do, one level up, I have a Trick directory. Why do I need a submodule at all? I mean, I can just have whoever's developing with me also download Trick and install it and just have it on their machine and continue to develop in the repo we care about. And that's true, but the purpose of the submodule is that it lets you tie a specific version, or actually a specific commit to the development flow of the repo you care about over the history of that repo. So I don't know if that makes sense at first, but I mean, one way to think of it is, okay, well, I downloaded Trick a month ago, and if I have a developer that needs to download Trick and they get a different version, then technically we're doing development in the sim we care about with 2 different versions. And that might be okay depending on what you're doing, but in general, if you want to include a third-party dependency in your repo, a good way to do that is by using Git Submodules. And so that's really the purpose of it. It's a way to specify, hey, I have a repo that has a dependency on some source code. I'm not really developing in that dependency. I'm just using it, and I'd like to track my use of it with my repo itself. So that was probably enough words. Let's go ahead and get to it. So what I've done here, actually, I'm going to flip over to GitHub real quick. This repo exists in GitHub. I'll just pull that up real quick. This is my GitHub page. Here's the carsim repo that I was just talking about. And I have forked the Trick repo. And the reason I did this was because I want to show you how to push to submodules and to push to super projects, which is just a fancy name for the repo that contains a submodule. And since I don't have permission to push directly to Trick, what I've done is I've forked it so it's my own version and I can push to it. So let's add Trick as a submodule here. The way you do it is Git Submodule add, and then the URL of the submodule to add. So in this case, we want to add Trick as a submodule. So GitHub's nice. It gives you the URL right over here. So you can just copy and paste that guy. And then the final argument is an optional name to give it. You could call it, trick blah or whatever. I'm just going to call it trick. I think if you don't give it any name, it'll default to whatever the URL says. And what you'll see is that it is now cloning a copy of the trick repo inside of our super project, which is CarSim. And so this might take a couple minutes because it has to download the whole thing. All right, our submodule is done cloning. Minimize this background so we can see a little bit easier. So what this did, when we did git submodule add, it did a couple things. One, it went out and it cloned from this location and it dumped it where we told it to go, which is in a trick folder right at the top level. So if I do an ls, you'll see a new trick folder, and this is a Git repo. The other thing that it did was, if I do git status, it did a couple things. One, it added a new file called .gitmodules. This is where the super project, which is the CarSim, the top level project, stores information about what its submodules are. So if I just cat that file real quick, you'll see it has an entry for a submodule named trick, where it exists in our repo, which is in the trick folder, and the URL of where it came from. But we also have, and this is a little confusing at first when you first introduce it, it says new file trick. Well, that's kind of misleading, right? Because it's actually a repo. If I trick, there's all the trick stuff. So this is one of the quirks of Git and submodules, is that changes to a submodule in the index show up as the whole repo. It's not one file. And so this is an interesting point to be made, and this is really crucial to the understanding of how submodules work, is that the super project, CarSim in this example, tracks only the state of its submodules at their commit level, meaning that SHA-1 identifier. CarSim has no knowledge of the history of this repo. All that CarSim knows about the trick submodule is what commit should be checked out to in that submodule to correspond to the work we're doing at the super project level. I hope that makes sense. But so what I mean by that is, if we cd into the trick directory and we do git log, this is the git log for trick, mind you, we'll notice that the top level commit is 74F88, etc. And so what I'm saying when I say this git status is that what the git submodule add command did was it said, hey, I have a new submodule, it's called trick, and I want you to stage for commit. Trick should be at the location 7AF, whatever that commit was we just saw up here, 74F8. So I want to commit to the CarSim that the trick repo should be at 74F8 from this commit forward, if that makes sense. So and we're going to go over that again when we start changing the top level repo and the submodule. So let's just go ahead and commit this change. Added trick submodule to project. And that's all we did in this commit. And remember, so Git commits are local, so this hasn't been reflected on GitHub until we actually push that out. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to do git push origin master colon master. Now, I've gone over git push in previous videos, so if you're unfamiliar with this, please go back and watch those. Give it my authentication information. And it pushed our changes to GitHub. So we can verify that if you're curious. We can basically refresh, go back to this top level page, go to my CarSim, and you'll see that we now have a Git modules and a trick submodule here. So It's a nice, warm, fuzzy feeling, right? So what I want to show here is some complications of using Git submodules. And if you're new to Git and you're thrown into a huge project that has submodules, it gets confusing fast. So I want to show you a couple of those situations and explain them to you. So let's go ahead and pretend that I am also a trick developer. So I work in CarSim, but I'm actually a trick developer. And I want to make modifications to the submodule in place here inside of CarSim, and then push those changes out, have other people work with them. I just want to show you what it means to work inside the submodule from the super project perspective. So like I mentioned before, I don't know if this is immediately clear, but as soon as you change directory into a submodule, all Git commands are with respect to that repo. So anything I do inside a trick, whether it's git log, git branch, git status, it's all trick and down. It has no knowledge of CarSim. And if I do a git status at the CarSim level, in fact, I'll show you. It won't reflect anything under trick. So I'll show you that as an example right now. Let's go in and we're going to change the README at the bottom and say, Dan added this line. Write the file. Now if I do git status, we see this change. And we are on the master branch in trick. Now, check this out though. If I go up one level and I do git status, I see something different. I'm seeing CarSim's git status. And remember, all CarSim knows about trick is that it is a submodule and there's a commit it should be checked out to. And that's what this is telling you. It says modified content. Git is saying, hey, I inspected this trick submodule and it is different. There's content inside this repo that is modified. That's all that's saying. And of course there is, because we just changed a file. So now we're going to go into trick and we're going to commit this change and show you what happens. So, oops, forgot to add it. Git commit, tweaked, readme for demonstration purposes. By the way, guys, I make a lot of commits here that you should never make just for demonstration purposes. You shouldn't make commits this small, especially for adding nonsense to a README. Anyway, so now if I do git status inside my trick directory, it says it's clean. Of course, we're ahead of master by one commit because we just made one. And if I go up a level and do git status, we see something similar. Remember, when we did that before, we saw modified content on trick. Now we see modified trick, but it specifically calls out that there are new commits in trick. And the fact that this shows up at all in red here means it's basically a warning to the user. It says, hey, this submodule is not checked out to exactly what I as the super project know it should be, which is that 7.4 commit that we were talking about before. So that's all that it's saying here. And it's basically a warning that if you're doing development now in CarSim, well, that's fine, but you should be aware that the submodule underneath is modified from what CarSim says it should be based on the last commit. I hope that makes sense. So let's say we wanted to change the commit that CarSim says trick should be on. Let's say we made this change in trick, we like it, it's approved. We want to go ahead and tell CarSim to step up to using this newer commit. The way you do that is by doing a git add on the submodule. And now if I do git status, this wireless keyboard's killing me. We'll notice that it has been staged in the index. And so this literally translates to, the user saying, I'm about to commit the new state of the trick submodule to CarSim. I want CarSim to reference that new state. And that new state, if we do a git log, is this top commit CFE. So let's go ahead and do that. Go back to git status real quick, and we're going to commit this. Oops, git commit. And what I like to put in these commit messages is an explicit statement that makes sense with respect to how submodules work, which is why I always phrase it updated reference to trick submodule. I like this phrasing. I like saying updated the reference, because that's literally what's happening when you tell a super project, here's what you should track in the submodule. You're tracking the state, the reference to that commit. You're not technically tracking the content in that submodule. So I keep repeating that, but it's really, really important. So now if we do git status, we'll notice that our local commit, or our local branch is ahead of origin master, because we just told it, hey, we made a new commit saying track the latest state of trick. And we sort of have the same thing going on in our trick repo, remember? So git status, we're also ahead by one commit. And what I want to point out here is that neither one of these states has been pushed to GitHub, which is our origin for both of them. And so you might wonder, well, how do I push both? Can I just push at the top level here in the car sim? If I push the top level, how do the commits from trick get pushed out? Is it automatic? And the answer is no. So this is one of the things that trips people up the most when they're introduced to submodules and they have to actually work in the submodule, which is that there's still independent repos. CarSim knows that it needs to track the state of trick from the SHA-1 commit perspective, but it's not handling any of the Git innards of sharing the commits from this repo. I don't know if that makes sense, but this trick repo is a standalone Git repo. So if we want to share this commit, we need to git push the commit in the trick repo, and we need to do that first, because I'm kind of tempted to show you here what happens if you don't do that. So let's go ahead and do it the wrong way first, because I want to point this out. I want to show you the error. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and push origin. We're going to push to origin our local master to the destination master. So we're going to push that commit that says, hey, you need to track the new state of the trick repo. So push this out. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to reclone CarSim in just a temporary area to show you why this is broken. We pushed out a new state of CarSim, but if you remember, it's telling, our push just told the remote of CarSim, hey, you need to track this new SHA-1 for trick that we just created inside that trick repo, but we never pushed that commit, right? So check this out. If we go to /temp, I'm just going to git clone, get the URL for CarSim real quick here. Scroll down, copy, paste, okay, do a git clone. Okay, so it cloned CarSim. This is an example. Somebody else is using your repo. They initially clone it, and they go in there, and you'll notice right away that there's a trick folder. That's our submodule, but if you look in this folder, there's no files. And that's because it's a submodule. So when you're working in a repo with submodules, you may recall that the first time you cloned it, you had to do what's called a Git Submodule update. And the first time you do it, actually, you have to pass it this init flag that basically says if it's not initialized yet as a submodule in the super project CarSim, to go ahead and do it. So what happens if I do this is it's going to clone into the trick directory, which means it's going to slurp down the whole thing again. So now that the submodule is done cloning from our git submodule update --init command that we did, we'll notice that it brought in the information, but then we get an error at the end, and this is what I wanted to show you. Fatal, reference is not a tree, CFE CD99. This is the commit that we made in the trick submodule, but we never pushed it out to the remote. So when we went and cloned CarSim says, hey, I have a trick submodule. It clones it, it brings it down, and then the last step is to check out to the commit that CarSim knows it to be at, which is this CFE commit, and it's not there. It doesn't exist in the trick repo because it was never pushed. So I just wanted to show you that, and that's why when you hear people talk about submodules and you have to work in them, and if you use a centralized approach and you actually push in your workflow, then you need to git push your submodule first before you git push the commit that references the new state of that submodule, in this case at the CarSim level. So let's just go ahead and do that. So remember we have this one commit, we're ahead of origin master. So if we just git push origin master to master, the trick repo at origin, which is GitHub, was updated with the latest state. You can see CFE is right here. So what that means is if we go back to that temp repo and do a CarSim, and we do git submodule update now, the init, actually you don't need it, but it doesn't hurt. You can always leave it in there. You'll notice that we get the correct information, and so it was successfully able to check out because it actually went out to the remote, it did a fetch, it pulled down the latest, it got CFE, and it checked out to it. So one thing that might also be immediately interesting to you if you start thinking about how this works is, let's say I'm in my trick submodule and I want to make some commits on another branch. I want to try something out, and so I'm on the master branch here. Let's make a new branch, check out -b. I'll make a test thing branch, and I'll make some commit that I don't know if it's going to work, but so let's go into a file, tweak this, write the file. Just going through this real quick. I'm going to make a commit, make file. So I've made a commit, and what I can do is I can push and work in this repo as much as I want, and I'm not going to affect anyone else. You know, other developers using CarSim that also have this trick submodule aren't going to be affected by it unless I go to the CarSim level and explicitly tell it what new commit should be tracked for the trick submodule. So, you know, for example, I can git push origin, so test thing, and we're going to create a new branch called test thing on the remote. It's going to ask me for my authentication. And I just want to point out that this push is not affecting what CarSim thinks the trick submodule should be pointed to. It's explicitly known at the CarSim level. And if we wanted to have CarSim track this new state, we'd have to go up a level and explicitly add it. So you can see that, you know, git status is showing, hey, this trick submodule is at a different state than I know it should be at. This is just the warning here. And if I wanted to add it, then this is how you would do it. It's in the index, and then commit it, and then you push it out, and then everyone else that does a fetch and merge on CarSim and a submodule update will be forced to use that new state of the trick repo. So anyway, I'm not going to do that, so let's undo that. Reset head trick. And I think I'm going to, this video is getting long, I think I'm going to stop it here. I just wanted to introduce you to how to create a submodule. It's likely that whatever project you're working in, the submodules have already been created. So it's really, I wanted to point out how you interact with super projects and submodules, especially in the case where you have to actually work in both of them. So this is just the first video on Git Submodule, because it's one of the most complex mechanisms that day-to-day users have to be aware of in Git. So anyway, with that, I'm just going to summarize real quick. To add a submodule, you do git add submodule, and then URL to the submodule, and path to submodule. This is basically where do you want it to exist. This last argument is where do you want it to exist in your super project that you're adding it to. And then the other command that you'll use a lot on a git fetch a git pull, aka a git fetch, and then a git merge would be git submodule update. And this just says, hey, I want my super project to update my submodules to what the latest commit I'm on says it should be. So anyway, I hope you're not too confused. Stay tuned for other submodule videos. My name's Dan, and I'll see you next time.